It was supposed to be a historic moment, his first address as king. The world expected unity, dignity, tradition. Instead, they got something no one saw coming. One sentence. One line that cut through decades of silence like a blade. "My wife is your queen, not my stepmother." In that instant, King William didn't just begin his reign, he ignited a storm that would ripple through the monarchy like never before. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The anticipation leading up to that moment had been carefully constructed. Every detail calculated. Every word presumably rehearsed to perfection. This was not just a speech, it was a symbol. The beginning of a new reign, a continuation of legacy, a reassurance to the world that stability remained intact. The weight of expectation was enormous, and yet for the first few moments everything unfolded exactly as planned. Calm, controlled, predictable. The kind of composure the monarchy has relied on for generations. But then something shifted. It wasn't immediate. It wasn't obvious to everyone at first. A subtle change in tone. A pause that lingered just a second longer than expected. And in that pause, something unspoken seemed to surface. Something that had been held back not just for days or weeks, but for years. And when he spoke again, the script no longer felt like a script. It felt personal, direct, unfiltered. "My wife is your queen, not my stepmother." The words landed with a force no one had prepared for. Not because they were loud, but because they were precise, deliberate. They didn't just state a fact, they drew a line between past and present, between personal truth and institutional expectation. And in doing so, they exposed something the monarchy had spent years trying to smooth over, to redefine, to quietly bury beneath carefully crafted narratives. The reaction was immediate, even if it wasn't visible in the way one might expect. Publicly, there was stillness. Applause came, but it felt different, measured, uncertain, almost delayed, as if those present were processing what they had just heard in real time, unsure whether to treat it as part of the speech or something else entirely. Privately, however, the impact was far more intense, because within royal circles, words like these are never accidental. They are never meaningless. And they are certainly never ignored. What made the moment even more striking was not just what was said, but what it implied. Decades of carefully maintained distance. Of relationships presented one way, while understood another. Of tensions that were never openly acknowledged, yet always quietly felt. And in one sentence, all of it was brought to the surface, not explained, not justified, just revealed. This was not the beginning of a narrative. It was the breaking of one. Because the monarchy does not operate on spontaneity. It operates on control, on predictability, on the careful management of image and message. And what William had just done, whether intentionally or not, disrupted that control. He introduced something unpredictable, something raw, something that could not be easily reshaped once it had been spoken aloud. And perhaps that is what made it so powerful. Not just the words themselves, but the fact that they existed at all. That they were allowed to exist. Because in a system where silence often speaks louder than truth, choosing to speak even briefly, even indirectly, can carry consequences that extend far beyond the moment. The world had just witnessed a king take his first step not with quiet continuity, but with a statement that felt almost defiant. Not against the institution itself, but against the version of reality it had long maintained. And in doing so, he raised a question that could not be easily answered. Because that sentence didn't come from nowhere, it was built on years of silence, tension, and a relationship the palace never wanted the world to truly understand. For years, the royal family presented a picture of quiet unity. Smiles, appearances, carefully crafted moments of togetherness. But behind closed doors, a different story was unfolding, one marked not by open conflict, but by distance. A distance that spoke louder than any argument ever could. And at the center of it all was a relationship that was never quite what it seemed. Because what the world saw was never the full story, it was the version designed to be seen. Carefully measured interactions, polite exchanges, a sense of stability that reassured the public that everything was as it should be. But distance doesn't always announce itself loudly. It settles quietly, in the spaces between conversations, in the absence of warmth where it might otherwise be expected. And over time, that absence becomes its own kind of presence, one that cannot be easily explained, but is deeply felt. For William, that distance began early, not with confrontation, but with awareness. A gradual understanding that something within the family dynamic did not fully align with the image presented to the world. It wasn't a single moment that defined it, but a series of small, almost unnoticeable realizations, the kind that accumulate slowly, shaping perception without ever needing to be spoken aloud. And as he grew older, that perception didn't fade, it sharpened. Camilla's presence, while officially integrated into the royal structure, carried a complexity that was never openly addressed. Publicly, she was positioned within the family with increasing acceptance, her role normalized through time and careful narrative management. But privately, normalization does not always translate to connection. Proximity does not guarantee closeness, and in this case, it often seemed to highlight the absence of it. There were no dramatic confrontations, no visible fractures that could be pointed to as definitive proof of tension. Instead, there were moments brief, subtle, easily overlooked. A lack of ease in shared spaces. Interactions that felt formal rather than natural. A sense that while roles had been assigned, relationships had not fully followed. And in an environment where every detail is observed, even the smallest inconsistencies begin to carry meaning. The monarchy, aware of this complexity, moved carefully. It always does. Narratives were shaped not through denial, but through reinforcement. Public appearances, shared engagements, carefully curated interactions designed to present cohesion. And over time, that image became accepted, even expected. But acceptance on the surface does not erase what exists beneath it. It simply conceals it more effectively. And that concealment comes at a cost. Because unresolved emotions do not disappear, they remain. They evolve. They influence decisions, perceptions, and ultimately actions. For William, those unspoken dynamics became part of his internal landscape, something he carried quietly, something that informed how he understood his place within the family and how he defined the relationships around him. What makes this even more significant is not just the existence of that distance, but its persistence. It did not resolve with time. It did not soften into something more natural. Instead, it remained steady, shaping the emotional boundaries that would later become visible in ways no one expected. Because when something is never fully addressed, it does not fade, it waits. And that is what makes his words so much more than a passing statement. They were not formed in the moment. They were built over years, shaped by experiences that were never publicly acknowledged, but deeply felt. A quiet accumulation of understanding, of observation, of emotional distance that never fully closed. Because to understand the weight behind William's words, you have to go back to where it all began long before crowns, titles, and carefully controlled narratives. Some stories don't end, they linger, shaping everything that comes after. And for William, the past was never truly behind him. It followed him, quietly, persistently, influencing how he saw the people around him, especially the ones closest to the crown. Because before there was a king, before there was a speech, there was a memory, one that refused to fade, no matter how much time had passed. Because memory, in this case, was not just something he carried, it was something that defined him. The legacy of Diana was never distant, never abstract. It lived in the way the world spoke about her, in the way her presence was still felt long after she was gone, and most of all in the space she left behind. A space that could never truly be filled, no matter how carefully the narrative was adjusted, no matter how much time passed. And for William, that absence was not quiet. It was constant. Growing up within that shadow meant learning to navigate two realities at once. Publicly, there was a story of healing, of moving forward, of a monarchy adapting to loss with dignity and strength. But privately, grief does not follow structure. It does not align with timelines or expectations. It lingers in ways that are unpredictable, in moments that cannot be prepared for. And for William, that grief was not just about loss, it was about understanding. understanding what had happened, why it had happened, and how it had changed everything around him. And within that understanding, there were questions. Not always spoken, not always fully formed, but present nonetheless. Questions about relationships, about choices, about the people who remained and the roles they now occupied. Because as the monarchy worked to stabilize its image, to present continuity and acceptance, there was an effort subtle but deliberate to reshape perception, to move from what was to what needed to be seen. And while that may have worked on the surface, it did not erase what existed beneath. Camilla's presence in particular became intertwined with that complexity, not as a singular cause, not as a simple narrative of conflict, but as part of a larger emotional landscape that William was still trying to understand. Her role, officially defined and publicly reinforced, did not automatically translate into emotional clarity. Because acceptance, when it is expected rather than chosen, does not always settle easily. It can exist alongside unresolved feelings, creating a tension that is difficult to articulate, but impossible to ignore. This is where the divide between personal truth and institutional narrative becomes most visible. The monarchy required cohesion, stability, a forward-moving story that reassured the world everything was under control. But personal experience does not always align with institutional need. And for William, that misalignment became something he carried quietly, something that shaped how he viewed not just individuals, but the system itself. Over time, that internal conflict did not disappear, it deepened. It became less about specific moments and more about perspective, about how he understood his place within a structure that had both supported and challenged him, about how he reconciled the expectations placed upon him with the emotions he had never fully resolved. And in that process, something began to take shape not outwardly, not in a way that could be easily seen, but internally. Because identity, especially in a life like his, is not formed in isolation. It is shaped by memory, by experience, by the tension between what is felt and what is required. And for William, those elements were constantly in motion, constantly influencing the way he thought, the way he responded, the way he prepared for a role that would one day demand clarity from him. So when he stood as king and spoke those words, they were not sudden, they were not impulsive. They were the result of something that had been forming for years, an understanding shaped by memory, by loss, by the quiet persistence of a past that never truly left him. And as the years passed, those unresolved emotions didn't disappear, they evolved, quietly shaping the man who would one day stand before the world as king. Kings are taught many things: how to lead, how to speak, how to maintain control. But above all, they are taught when to stay silent. William learned all of it. Every rule, every expectation, every unspoken boundary. And yet, when the moment came, he chose something different. Not rebellion, but revelation. And that choice would change everything. Because from the very beginning, William's life was not his own to shape freely. It was structured, guided, carefully molded by an institution that values precision above all else. Every word he spoke, every reaction he showed, every emotion he revealed, each one carried consequence. And so, like those before him, he was taught the discipline of restraint, not just in action, but in expression. To feel, but not to show too much. To understand, but not to say everything. To carry truth quietly, even when it pressed heavily against the surface. Silence, in the monarchy, is not weakness. It is strategy. It is protection. It is the invisible thread that holds everything together when tensions rise beneath the surface. And William mastered that silence early. He learned how to navigate rooms filled with expectation, how to respond without revealing too much, how to maintain composure even when the weight of his reality became difficult to contain. It became second nature, almost instinct. But silence has a limit, because over time the gap between image and truth begins to widen. The version presented to the world becomes more refined, more controlled, while the reality beneath it grows more complex, more difficult to ignore. And for William, that gap did not go unnoticed. He saw it. He felt it. Not just in isolated moments, but as a pattern, something that repeated, something that defined how the monarchy operated. And slowly, that awareness began to shift something within him. It wasn't immediate. It wasn't dramatic. It was gradual. A quiet buildup of understanding, of recognition, of a growing realization that maintaining control did not always mean suppressing truth. That there were moments, rare, significant moments, where silence could become something else entirely. Something limiting. Something that prevented clarity instead of protecting it. And within that shift, Catherine's presence became more important than ever. Because where the institution demanded restraint, she offered grounding. Where the system required control, she provided balance. Not by encouraging defiance, but by reinforcing something deeper: confidence. The kind that doesn't come from breaking rules, but from understanding when those rules no longer serve their purpose. And in that space, William began to change. Not outwardly at first, but internally. The transition from heir to king was not just about title, it was about authority. About stepping into a position where the responsibility to lead is no longer theoretical, but immediate. And with that came a new kind of clarity, a realization that leadership is not just about preserving what exists, but about defining what it becomes. And that definition cannot always come from silence alone. So when the moment arrived, when he stood before the world with every expectation resting on his shoulders, the choice he made was not impulsive. It was deliberate, measured, the result of years of observation, of internal conflict, of understanding the difference between maintaining an image and revealing a truth. And in choosing to speak as he didn't abandon control, he redefined it. Because control in that moment was not about withholding, it was about precision. About saying exactly what needed to be said, no more, no less. And that is what made it so powerful. Not loud, not emotional in the way one might expect, but clear, unmistakable. A statement that carried both personal meaning and institutional consequence. And that is where everything begins to shift. Because once a king chooses to speak with that level of clarity, the silence that once defined the system begins to change. It cannot return to what it was before, not entirely. The balance has been altered, even if only slightly. But if William was ready to speak, the question remained, was the monarchy ready to hear what he had to say? In the middle of the tension, there was one figure who stood steady: Catherine. Not just as William's wife, but as the woman he chose to define his future with. And when he spoke those words, he wasn't just rejecting the past, he was elevating her. But in doing so, he placed her at the center of a storm she never asked for. Because Catherine's presence in William's life has never been incidental, it has been foundational. In a world shaped by expectation, scrutiny, and constant pressure, she became something rare. Not an escape from the system, but a stabilizing force within it. Someone who understood the weight without being consumed by it. Someone who could stand beside him, not just in public duty, but in private reality. And over time, that quiet strength became something William relied on more than anything else. Her transformation into queen was never going to be simple. It was always going to be watched, analyzed, measured against standards that few could ever truly meet. Every decision, every word, every moment would carry significance beyond itself. And yet, Catherine stepped into that role with a kind of control that didn't demand attention, it commanded it. Not through force, but through consistency. Through the ability to remain composed even as the pressure around her intensified. But William's statement changed the context entirely. Because in that moment, Catherine was no longer just the future queen, she became the center of a declaration that redefined the narrative. My wife is your queen. It was more than affirmation. It was positioning. A clear, deliberate statement about where his loyalty stands, about who represents the future he is choosing to lead. And while that may have strengthened her position publicly, it also placed an entirely new kind of weight on her shoulders. Because with elevation comes expectation. The world's attention shifts. The scrutiny sharpens. Every action becomes more significant. Every silence more noticeable. And Catherine, who has spent years mastering the balance between visibility and restraint, now finds herself under a different kind of lens. One that is not just observing her role, but interpreting her place within a moment that has already begun to reshape the monarchy's narrative. And yet, she does not react in a way that reveals the pressure. She doesn't need to. Her strength has never been about outward response, it has always been about internal control. The ability to absorb tension without allowing it to disrupt her composure. The ability to remain steady when everything around her begins to shift. And that steadiness, now more than ever, becomes essential. Because behind the admiration, behind the public support that often surrounds her, there is a quieter reality. One where the expectations are heavier, the stakes higher, and the margin for error almost non-existent. Where being the symbol of the future means carrying the weight of decisions that are not entirely her own, but that define how she is perceived nonetheless. And at the center of it all is William's choice. Not just to speak, but to speak about her in a way that leaves no ambiguity, that draws a line between past and present, and places her firmly on one side of it. A choice that reflects not just loyalty but conviction. A belief that the future he is building cannot exist without her at its core. But conviction, while powerful, does not shield from consequence. Because every statement creates a reaction, and every reaction creates a ripple. And those ripples are already beginning to spread, touching not just the present, but the past that William's words so clearly referenced. A past that has not disappeared, but has simply remained beneath the surface, waiting. And while Catherine stood as the symbol of William's future, the past he referenced so boldly could not be ignored any longer. Within hours, the palace moved. Not publicly, not dramatically, but decisively. Because moments like this are not left to unfold on their own. They are managed, contained, reshaped. But this time, something felt different. Because the words had already reached the world, and once spoken, they could not be taken back. Because inside the monarchy, response is never delayed, it is calculated. The moment William's words settled into the public consciousness, a parallel reaction began behind closed doors. Quiet conversations, controlled exchanges, a shift in tone that only those within the inner circle would fully recognize. This was not panic in the traditional sense. It was something more precise, a tightening of control, a recognition that something significant had just occurred and that it needed to be addressed before it defined itself. The immediate concern was not what had been said, but how it would be understood. Because interpretation, in this world, carries more power than intention. The sentence itself was clear, but its implications were not easily contained. Was it personal? Was it symbolic? Was it a subtle rejection of the past? Or something far more direct? These were not questions that could be left unanswered. Because unanswered questions have a way of expanding, of creating narratives that move beyond control. And control is everything. Efforts began almost instantly to shape the narrative, not by denying what was said, but by guiding how it would be perceived. Carefully placed responses, subtle shifts in messaging, the kind of adjustments that are never obvious but always intentional. The goal was not to erase the moment, because that was no longer possible. The goal was to absorb it, to integrate it into a version of the story that maintained stability, that avoided escalation, that preserved the image the monarchy depends on. But this time, that task was more complicated than usual. Because beneath the surface, there was a divide. Not openly acknowledged, not formally expressed, but present nonetheless. On one side, those who believed in maintaining tradition above all else, in preserving the established order, the unspoken rules that have defined the monarchy for generations. And on the other, those who saw something different in William's words, not disruption, but evolution. A shift towards something more transparent, more aligned with a world that no longer responds to silence in the same way. That divide did not create immediate conflict, but it created tension. A tension that made every decision more difficult, every response more deliberate. Because this was not just about one speech, it was about what that speech represented. A moment where personal truth intersected with institutional expectation in a way that could not be easily separated. And with that came risk. Because if the situation was not managed carefully, it could expose something the monarchy has spent years avoiding: visible internal strain. The kind that suggests not unity, but complexity. Not stability, but layers of unresolved history that have never been fully addressed. And once that perception takes hold, it becomes difficult to reverse. So the effort intensified. Not outwardly, not in a way that would draw attention, but internally. A careful recalibration of how things would move forward. what would be said, what would remain unsaid. Because in moments like this, silence does not disappear, it becomes strategic, more intentional than ever. But even with that control, one realization could not be avoided. This moment could not be undone. The words existed now, beyond the palace, beyond internal discussions, beyond any attempt to reshape them entirely. They had already taken on a life of their own, moving through public consciousness, sparking reactions that could not be predicted or fully controlled. And that is what made this different from anything before. Because for the first time in a long time, the monarchy was not just responding to a situation, it was reacting to something it had not fully anticipated. And beyond the palace walls, the reaction was even more intense and far less controlled. The world didn't stay silent. It never does. Within moments, the speech spread across headlines, screens, and conversations everywhere. And with it came a wave of reactions, some supportive, some shocked, some deeply divided. Because what William said wasn't just personal, it was political. And the world was ready to respond. Because in a time where every word can travel faster than intention, the impact was immediate and unstoppable. The speech didn't remain a moment, it became a movement of conversation, interpretation, and reaction. Headlines emerged almost instantly, each one framing the same sentence in a different light. Some called it bold, others called it reckless. Some saw honesty, others saw disruption. And within that divide, the narrative began to fracture in real time. For many, William's words felt like a long overdue shift. A break from the carefully managed distance that has defined the monarchy for generations. There was admiration in that response, a sense that finally, something real had been said. Something that acknowledged what had always been felt, but never openly addressed. To those voices, this wasn't controversy, it was clarity. A king choosing truth over tradition, even if only for a moment. But not everyone saw it that way. For others, the statement crossed an invisible line. A boundary that has always existed within royal protocol, even if it is never formally spoken. Because the monarchy does not operate on personal expression, it operates on collective image. And in choosing to speak in a way that felt deeply personal, William had, in their eyes, disrupted that balance. Not by what he said, but by how he said it. The tone, the implication, the unmistakable sense that something private had been made public. And that is where the tension began to escalate. Because this was no longer just about one speech, it became a larger debate. A conversation about what the monarchy should be and what it is becoming. Tradition versus transparency. Control versus authenticity. The very foundations of the institution being questioned not through scandal, but through a single, carefully delivered sentence that refused to fit neatly into expectation. Social discourse intensified, not quietly, but rapidly. Discussions that once existed in smaller circles suddenly expanded into global conversations. Supporters argued that evolution was necessary, that a modern monarchy cannot survive without moments of honesty. Critics warned that too much openness risks unraveling the very structure that holds the institution together. And between those perspectives, the monarchy itself became the subject of a debate it could not fully control. What made it even more compelling was the emotional layer beneath it all. Because this wasn't a distant political issue, it was deeply human. A son, a husband, a king, all intersecting in one moment of expression. And that complexity drew attention in a way few royal events ever do. People weren't just observing, they were reacting, interpreting, choosing sides, not based on policy, but on perception, emotion, and belief. And as that reaction spread, the image of the monarchy began to shift, not dramatically, not all at once, but subtly. In the way it was discussed, in the way it was questioned, in the way it was seen not just as an institution, but as something more fluid, more exposed than it had been before. A system that for a moment revealed something beneath its surface. That shift is what makes this moment so significant. Because public perception does not change overnight, but it does change through moments like this. Moments where expectation is disrupted, where narrative is challenged, where something unexpected forces a reconsideration of what has always been accepted. And now, That reconsideration is happening. Quietly in some places, loudly in others. But undeniably, it is happening. And as the reactions continued to build, one question began to overshadow everything else. What does this mean for the future of the monarchy itself? For centuries, the monarchy has survived by adapting slowly, carefully, strategically. But moments like this don't allow for slow change. They force it. And now the institution finds itself at a crossroads, not because of scandal, but because of truth. And truth, once spoken, has a way of changing everything. Because what William did was not simply deliver a speech, it disrupted a rhythm that has been maintained for generations. The monarchy has always evolved, but it has done so quietly, almost invisibly, adjusting just enough to remain relevant without ever appearing unstable. Change was something that happened behind the scenes, carefully managed, rarely acknowledged. But this moment was different. This was change happening in real time, in front of the world, without the usual layers of control. And that is what makes it so powerful, and so uncertain. Because now the institution is faced with a tension it cannot easily resolve. On one side stands legacy, the weight of tradition, the expectations built over centuries, the unspoken rules that have defined what it means to be royal. On the other side stands a world that no longer responds to silence in the same way. A world that values clarity, authenticity, and emotional honesty, even from those who have historically remained distant. William's speech exists directly between those two forces. It is both an act of continuity and a signal of change. Continuity, because it reinforces his role, his authority, his position within the monarchy. But change, because it introduces something that has rarely been allowed to surface so openly: personal truth. And that truth, even when carefully delivered, carries a risk the institution has always tried to avoid. Because honesty is unpredictable. Once it is introduced, it cannot be contained in the same way as tradition. It invites interpretation. It invites response. And more importantly, it invites expectation. If a king can speak like this once, what does that mean for what comes next? Will future moments carry the same level of openness? Will silence, once the default, begin to feel like avoidance instead of strength? These are not questions the monarchy can ignore, because the power of this moment lies not just in what has already happened, but in what it suggests moving forward. A possibility that the institution may begin to shift, not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually towards something more transparent, more responsive, more aligned with a world that no longer accepts distance without explanation. But that shift comes with risk. Because transparency, while powerful, removes a layer of protection the monarchy has relied on for generations. It exposes complexity. It reveals tension. It allows the public to see not just the image, but the reality beneath it. And that reality, while human, is not always as controlled, as unified, or as stable as the institution has long presented it to be. And yet avoiding that shift may carry its own risk. Because a monarchy that refuses to evolve does not remain unchanged, it becomes disconnected. And in a world that is constantly moving forward, disconnection is something that cannot be sustained indefinitely. So the question is no longer whether change will happen, but how it will be managed, how it will be shaped, and whether it can occur without destabilizing the very foundation it is trying to preserve. This is where William's role becomes more than symbolic. Because his speech is no longer just a moment, it is a marker. A point in time that future decisions will inevitably be measured against. A moment that defines not just how he chose to begin his reign, but how he may choose to lead it moving forward. With restraint, as tradition dictates, or with a different kind of control. One that allows truth to exist alongside expectation. And that uncertainty is what makes this moment so significant. Because the monarchy is no longer standing on stable ground, it is standing at a point of transition. A place where the past still holds influence, but the future is beginning to demand something new. Something not yet fully defined, not yet fully understood, but undeniably present. And yet, despite all the analysis, speculation, and reaction, the most important question remains unanswered. Sometimes, a single sentence can define an entire reign. Not policies, not ceremonies, just words. And for King William, those words may become the moment history remembers most. Because in speaking them, he didn't just reveal his truth, he revealed the kind of king he intends to be. Because what he said cannot be separated from what it represents. It was not just a statement directed at a moment, it was a signal directed at the future. A declaration that leadership, under his reign, may not follow the same quiet patterns the monarchy has relied on for generations. And that shift, however subtle it may seem now, carries a weight that will only grow with time. The significance of those words lies in their permanence. Speeches fade. Events are replaced. But certain moments remain, not because they are repeated, but because they redefine what comes after. And this feels like one of those moments. A point where the line between personal truth and public responsibility blurred in a way that cannot be undone. Where the role of king became inseparable from the identity of the man behind it. That is where the real transformation begins. Because emotional honesty within the monarchy has always been carefully controlled, measured, limited, presented only when it aligns with expectation. But this was different. This was not emotion used to reinforce tradition. This was emotion that challenged it, not dramatically, not recklessly, but with a precision that made it impossible to ignore. And in doing so, it introduced a new dimension to royal leadership, one where truth is not entirely hidden behind formality. But with that comes complexity. Because when the personal becomes public, it changes how everything is interpreted. Decisions are no longer seen as purely institutional, they are seen through the lens of individual perspective. Loyalty, history, relationships, all of it becomes part of the narrative. And that creates both connection and division. Because while some will see strength in that honesty, others will see risk. A departure from the stability that has long defined the monarchy's image. And that tension will not disappear. It will follow him. It will shape how his actions are understood, how his decisions are evaluated, how his reign is remembered. Because this moment does not exist in isolation, it becomes part of a larger story, one that will continue to unfold with every choice he makes moving forward. A story where the balance between tradition and truth will be constantly tested. This is what makes his words so powerful. Not because they were loud, not because they were confrontational, but because they were clear. And clarity, in a system built on control, carries a unique kind of force. It does not demand attention, it holds it. It does not create chaos, it reveals what already exists beneath the surface. And once that surface is broken, even slightly, it is never quite the same again. So the question now is not whether those words mattered. It is how much they will matter over time, because they have already begun to shape perception, to influence conversation, to redefine expectations, even if only in subtle ways. And as those effects continue to unfold, one thing becomes increasingly certain: this moment will not be forgotten. Not quickly, not easily. It will remain, quietly but persistently, as a reference point. A reminder of the moment a king chose to speak not just as a figure of authority, but as someone willing to let truth exist within that authority. And in doing so, he may have changed more than just perception, he may have changed the direction of the monarchy itself. Because the real story isn't what William said, it's what happens next and whether the monarchy can survive the truth he chose to speak. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.